So in this episode, we're going to be doing something I've been wanting to do for a little while now. I keep getting putting off for multiple reasons. Today's the day we're going to at least start it. And that's going to be doing a power steering swap on our 1972 Dodge. And a lot of the information that I will share with you today will pretty much cross-apply to all the other models, being cars and some of the trucks as well. A lot of the parts are the same, and we'll just look at a couple differences, things you need to look out for. Coming up next on the Hoosier Garage.
You're watching the Hoosier Garage.
So right here what I have is a power steering box. This is OEM for most anything from the, I guess, 60s, 70s. I got this one from our friend Kyle at RT's Auto Parts. He's got a bunch of them, and I bought it as a core. And it probably came out of a car, but these vans, they use the same ones. A lot of the trucks use the same ones. The only difference with this one is I sent it to Steer&Gear, and I believe they're out of Columbus, Ohio. And they rebuild it, but they also modify it that allow it to steer with a little more feel to it. Okay, now there's an operation out of Washington State that I have used also. They're called Firm Feel. They do the exact same thing, and I've had very good experience with them. I tried Steer&Gear this time because one, I was aware of them, and plus two, being in Indiana and Ohio, the shipping difference at the time that I ordered at was a little bit more advantageous to me. I will still give business to Firm Feel in the future. Probably on our next car we might switch back and forth. I know Steer&Gear and Firm Feel are right there in quality. Okay, and what you can do, you can go on 3 levels when you get one rebuilt. The first level is going to be stock. If you're familiar with a lot of the steering on these old Chryslers, it might be able to move it with one finger. Your ability to feel the road might be a little limited. It might be a little bit of play in it. It's just the way it was back then. What I like to do is go to a number 2. Number 2 firms it up a little bit, and it feels a little bit more like a newer vehicle would, where you have that little bit of drag to it. And maybe drag's not the best word, but it just feels a little more solid when you're turning that wheel. It has more of a manual steering feel, but without the actual having to labor to go through a hard part of the turn. Okay. They also have a number 3 setting, and all these pretty much go with the same thing. I know Firm Feel's very upfront about 1, 2, and 3, but 3 is if you're like road racing, or you need a really, really firm situation where that needs to be a harder turn, and they make the proper adjustments to make that do what you want. This being a street van, over-the-road van, we're going to go with number 2. I like going number 2 on my cars. I've went with it on a Challenger, on a Dark Sport that I had, and I want to say there was another vehicle, probably a Duster. Yeah, I had another Duster. So I've done it on 3 prior vehicles, and I'm blown away by it. It's one of the biggest upgrades you can do. If you want to go with the Borgson unit, that's fine. But I think this is a way for it to look stock, everything to fit stock, and you've got better steering. I mean, you can't beat that. Okay, so we've exposed this area for our steering box. Now there's a few directions we could go here. First one that we will want to do before we try to remove the box is to unbolt the steering column from the firewall. Okay, that will allow any additional play to what the coupler can't provide. But we can right now, just to free things up, is there is a roll pin right here in the kind of down the side of this steering coupler. Okay, now we have a 5/16 punch right here. This will chase it completely through. In a pinch, and I did a video on this, it seemed to do pretty good on my channel. But if you're in a junkyard or even here at home and you don't have a punch that won't just sink inside of the hole of that pin, or it's too wide, you know, you're just looking for the right thing, you can use a small block stock 318, 360, 340 push rod, and you can hammer it through. Just make sure you don't reuse that push rod, because you're likely going to tweak it. Even if you don't see it, you're going to tweak it enough to where it's not going to be usable. I always keep some old ones around just in case. Take them with me to the junkyard and stuff. That way I don't have to take my nice punch. But this should, from here, even though we got a little bit, you can see that play in that box right there. That's about what I deal with on the road when I'm driving. So we're going to go ahead and knock this pin out and free that up. You'll hear it. Now my problem with some of the punches is they do have a taper to them. This one has a slight taper, plus there's paint on it. So I kind of am a bigger believer on using an old push rod for this job than using a punch, because I had to go down to a smaller size punch. I'm going to anchor it back there so I can grab the roll pin. You hear it knocking out. And there it is. Sometimes, depending on the model, you can move this back a little bit. And obviously, that only goes so far. So that's where we do need to get into the steering column removal itself. So inside of your van or your car, here's your steering column base. There's a plate that wraps around it here. And if we kind of dig this back a little bit, you see there's a screw. That's what this van has, is a large kind of a panhead screw. And there's 3 of them around there. A lot of your cars or trucks will have almost the same bracket, but it'll have a couple of bolts, just bolt heads rather than screw heads, okay? So we want to remove that, or at least slide it back. It's the best thing it'll do. And then up here on a van, you have a saddle with 2 bolts, one here and one here. The cars are similar. This is just kind of behind the dash as opposed to exposed like this. And there's 2 studs that hang down, and there's a couple of nuts. One of them might hold a ground wire on it. Watch out for that, don't snap it. And then you just take those loose, and then the whole thing will just drop down. And if that's unbolted and it's disconnected from the shaft out there, or the steering box, I should say, this whole thing will slip right out. Watch for your wiring too, because there is a wire right here that can disconnect. And we might have to take this loose, the screw, this little chase, and that'll allow us to pull everything out. So just a couple things you gotta watch for when you do anything like this. So with your bolts on the firewall disconnected, your pin out of your coupler, and if everything's not dried up and everything, since this was put together just a few years ago, it should just pry right out. And now we're clear. And before we forget it, if we have any kind of shifter operation at the steering column, we'll want to disconnect any of that linkage. So this one just has a little hairpin on it. We'll pull that one out. All washers. Yeah, so you got a rubber bushing or grommet. We'll push the actual lever out, and that will be free to pull through the hole. So before we take the actual box out, we will have to take it loose from the suspension. So see this nut right here in the very center of the screen? That holds your idler arm. We need to remove that. I've already popped it loose. I happen to have this big boy right here. It's 1 5/16 inches. I'll have to put our puller on there to pull the pitman arm off of the sector shaft. And once we do that, we're just going to let it hang. It's going to remain where it is. And then we'll simply take that box out, replace it with the other one. If you use a regular manual steering box from like a car, a small car at least, the smaller style, that will be a little bit smaller there. And it won't quite translate to this one. You'll have to change the pitman arm, you have to change your hardware, a little bit different. And if you need a pitman arm puller, you can get those at O'Reilly's. You can rent it, and the reason they make you pay a little bit for it is just in case you keep it. Well, I do this kind of enough that I just, I've got a ball joint or tie rod puller, and then the pitman arm puller, and this is what we're going to use right here. So as you can see, I have that tool slipped up over the edges of the pitman. You can either use a socket, boxed in wrench, open end wrench, or in this particular one, there's the adapter so you can put an actual socket or extension on it. Make sure it's well lubricated. This should come off pretty good. It's not been on there that long. If you have all bolts or any of the bolts at all, it'll be this style. It'll take a 3/4 inch socket to take care of those. Most cases you'll have 3 of these. Our case right here, I have 2 of these, and then a stud on one of them with a nut on it. The nut's the same size, 3/4, but you might have a different configuration. No big deal. I've seen both ways, so it's no big deal.
What's new for 2024? Just open the free iHeartRadio app, search 70s Ride, and listen now. iHeartRadio free never sounded so good.
Right here, we have two of our couplers for our steering columns. They are empty at the moment. They don't have any of the guts in them. I've removed this one. This is our manual steering coupler, and this is our power steering coupler. At first glance, or especially when they're apart from each other, you think that they look the same, and they do have kind of the general shape, but there's a couple things to look at. If you hold them up side by side and even them up, you'll notice the power steering one on the right here is taller. And another difference is underneath here where the actual splined shafts are that they connect to. So this and this are different. If you look at them, it's very slight, but the one on the left here, the dirtier one, that's the manual steering coupler. It is a little bit larger, so the splines are a little bit different. In this one, it's a little bit smaller. It just doesn't need the leverage to turn it that this one does. So that's why this one's just a little bit smaller. So they are different. They don't interchange on the boxes, but the hardware inside of them will interchange with each other. I could take it out of this one, which was, I believe I replaced some of that hardware. I could take it out of this one and put it in this one. It simply slips and slides up inside this thing on as the shaft sets in there, okay? So there's your two differences there, and then any differences there. Now we'll kind of discuss a universal thing about both of those steering couplers. This is the manual one that came off of here. And you have this little clamp. These can be a little bit of a headache sometimes. They sometimes don't want to hold very well, and they even make a spring clip that helps hold all that together. And then you have a rubber seal right here. Now, if you need to ever take this off, don't try to beat it off with a hammer, because one, you're going to break something, because that's not how you take it off. Firstly, there's a small pin, and here it is. It is small. It's about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch long. It's just under 1/8 of an inch diameter, and it fits on one of the narrow sides of this coupler. So right here, you won't see one on the other side, and you won't see it on these wide sides, but you'll just see them right near the edge of that one there. And sometimes they're tapered, maybe due to time. It's kind of a roll pin in a way. It has a small cut in it. But that will fit in there, and you can either knock it out or you can knock it in. If you knock it in, make sure you don't lose it in the grease. But it'll simply tap in. And to get this one off, I tapped it all the way in with a punch. And I just used one of from our set here and knocked it all the way in. And then I wiggled up on it, and that allowed it to come off, okay? So we'll put this one away. The guts for this one, they're little slide blocks. One here, and then a little harness, a little metal harness spring clip that holds them together. And there's a little shaft that these are on. I'll take these off in a moment, but see, it's a shaft that just goes through the large shaft. So it's kind of a cross shape. These just simply fit on there, and that's where you get your movement and your kind of deflection of anything that hits on the road. It'll kind of, it won't translate into your hand as much because of some of the stuff. So we could take these apart. They're covered in grease, and then the clip just simply slides away. All right, and what holds that clip in is the actual casing sitting on there. So let me clean this stuff off and you get a good look at that. And that pretty much shows you what you got there. I'll turn it so you can see a little bit better. And as you can tell, it's just a pin going through the shaft. Okay, that can be removed. You can punch it out. And that's going to come down to our next thing, is how are we going to adapt our steering column situation to this power steering box. So since this shaft is so much longer, we can actually take this and cut it down and make the difference from here to here. We want to index, which is the position that this pin is in this shaft. It's indexed a certain way. we want to recreate that down the shaft. So we drill a hole all the way through it here like they have in the same spot. We don't want to put it at this angle because then it's going to throw all your steering wheel and all that stuff off. So we want to put the index of this in the exact same spot wherever we decide, and then cut the difference and even chamfer the edge of our shaft wherever we shrink it down to. Okay, another thing I'm going to show you, it's kind of an educational aspect here. There's our pin, and you notice the pin is in alignment with this hole right here. This hole was done by the factory, and it only goes in, you know, maybe about 1/8 of an inch or a little bit more. But that hole is a gauge hole, and what that gauge hole does is to tell you how to line your steering wheel and the column up with the actual steering on the car. And you notice right here on our couplers, on this side you have this little dimple right here, and it's always right next to this pinhole. So you have that one, and you'll see the same one on here. That's your indicator, so that when you go to line these up on the car, that hole, actually right there, needs to align with that one. And then if you have a master spline on your box, which I'll show you that. Here's your master spline on our manual box. It's basically where one of these splines or the teeth is removed, and you have kind of a little flat surface there. That's like an alignment area. And I went ahead and drilled a hole back here because we're going to be pretty much doing away with this one. So if by chance, even though this is getting really short, if by chance that shows, we'll have that gauge hole, and it'll be in the same line that the other ones were.
Now is a great time to like and subscribe to the Hoosier Garage.
All right, now you're probably wondering how much I had to cut off. How did I know how much to cut off? And it's a little bit of a judgment call in this situation, since I don't have an example to really go off of and measure, okay? So when you're looking at these couplers right here, this area where the shoulders pop out, that's basically your area to work with. That's where that little assembly fits down inside there, and it has that much play there. You don't really want it at the top, and it's best not to just push it all the way down to the very bottom. But what you're going to have to do is figure out where that pin, now here's the one we cut off, the pin went right through here, okay? We know that it needs to travel somewhere in this area right here, okay? That way that the assembly can still be fit on top of this, the little glides that go down through there, it's going to have to fit down in there, and then not have, you don't really want it to jam. You want it to have play on it, okay? So I lined everything up, had my measurement there based on about right there. So I wanted it to fall in this area, and then that told me I needed to cut that much off, okay? So happens that our gauge hole, you know, the one that we use to line up our steering wheel and make sure that the little dip that they cut into it there, make sure all that lines up. So I was able to take that hole and open it up completely, make a hole of equal size to that one there. You'll have to find the drill bit to match it perfectly, and make sure you go through it squarely. So if you can put it on a drill press, that'd be best. I had to kind of go through it and line some things up, and then I went through it that way, okay? Our pin was able to drive back in. You don't want it slopping back in here. You want it to drive back in. Square it up, will be good. Now the measurement I had on this specific one, 1 3/4. 1 3/4, and that's where we cut it. This is off that shaft right here. Into the center of the hole, to the edge of the piece, it's exactly 1/2 inch. I simply made a new gauge hole just above it, which you kind of see at the very, very top of the coupler right there. And that's just for continuity, kind of keep everything. If you do need that hole in the future, you'll know you can line it up and make everything right here line up the way it's supposed to, okay? And remember how we talked about that little piece there, that little chip, which shows us where center of the steering wheel is, okay? Now, like I also mentioned, not as I guess obvious here, but you can kind of see there is a double spline right there. That's where that needs to line up with this, okay? Because this doesn't have a double spline on it. Now, if it did, it would only go on one way. Now, as far as your idler arm underneath there, there's 4 of those masters on there, those master splines, okay? So they're gonna be this direction, it's like a cross in that direction. So the way that the suspension and the steering is right now, this van is pulled in straight. So the way it is hanging under there right now, the actual pitman arm, all you have to do is just adjust it just enough for it to fit onto the splines that are on the output shaft, okay? So it's not gonna be much, just a little bit, and then you'll be in place. If you have to move it more than a couple degrees, then something's off up here. But that, you should see this one facing out towards you, and that one should be right in the neighborhood of where it needs to sit on the rest of the suspension. Now down here, you can see the master spline right here. All right, and there's 4 of those in that plus pattern, if he's looking at it from the end. And I just adjusted the steering wheel just a little bit, and it allowed me to kind of slip that on there. Now that's a press fit, but the nut that you can use for that, the one we had off the other box, and the lock washer, that will work, okay? So this end's gonna go up in there. We'll put our lock washer in, and then our nut, and then tighten it down to where everything's seated on there really good, all the way down on that shaft. All right, so we're a few days later from what you was just seeing us do here. And there's something that we need to look at, because if you're doing this on a van, there's something that you really need to watch for. And what you have right here is our power steering valve. This is what the return line feeds through. And if you put it on here correctly, the only one way it will go, there's a couple O-rings here. It will set up against this and set about right there. And you notice that the nipple on this is parallel with the ground, okay? This is how most of our cars are, our muscle cars, or regular commuter cars on a Chrysler product. Most of them are out at this angle, okay? The problem is, if I go to put this on here and I assemble the front fascia, inner fascia of this radiator support back together, we're gonna have a problem, because from this plane to this plane right here, if you come down into it, it's gonna be pushing right into that panel. Now, the panel has a little dimple for this area, okay? But this isn't gonna cut it, because it's almost like it's gonna have to come out a 90-degree here and go back over to the pump, okay? So on a van, especially these, you're gonna have a straight one. If you look at them right here, the flange is exactly the same. And if we get our plane of where it mounts right here equal, this one's like at a 45-degree angle, and this one is just straight, okay? And what happens is when you go to put this one on there, put your O-rings on and all that kind of business, you put it on there, you bolt it up, and notice it's not sticking way out here, it's actually going down. Well, that dip accommodates this area and allows enough room for the hose to hang on it and circle around here and go to our pump, okay? So keep an eye on that, because that's the difference right there. You'll have to change that if you're going to work on one of these vans. Now on a car, this might be handy in certain situations depending on what accessories you have. This might be in the way, so remember, you have 2 different styles at least. There might even be a 3rd one out there. If anyone can confirm that, let me know down in the comments. Okay, so it's a little dark back in here, but I went ahead and put our return line on here. we have that valve that's correct for the van. It's on here. Goes all the way down to the back side of the pump. I have the high pressure line. It's tightened down, back side and up here. Now there's a little thing here that you might run into. I just want you to be aware of that because it'll throw you for a loop if you're not prepared for it. A lot of these steering boxes, they will have a fitting right here, and that fitting is in here on this one. Okay, it's the kind of the older piece right here. That's where I got my fingers around. It almost looks like a transmission line fitting, but it's flat on the back side here that sets in there. This did not have it. Okay, now I'm talking about the box. The box did not have it. I ordered the line for this specific application, a 72 van. Now, seeing as we're using a couple offbeat parts, they are the same, but they might be from a different year to application. This box did not have that valve in it, okay? So, you notice that when you're putting the line on and you have this female connector, and then you also have a female part here, a fitting on this valve, on this box right over here, okay? So you're thinking, well, I need something to go in there. Well, I looked at one of my other steering boxes I had laying around, and it happened to have this particular fitting on it. So this is the same thread. I put that in, and then this goes right over top of it. So that might be something you run into, might not. Either way, there's your difference. I have our hose running over, and whether this hose is longer or shorter, I'm seeing that this could be a potential problem with it coming over here. I don't know if it ever was for any other van of the similar build, but I went ahead and just took this larger piece of heater hose and I split it down the middle. And what I'm kind of getting at is there might be an edge of this nut right here that goes around here, and then part of the frame. I don't want it to rub against that with the vibration of the engine harmonics or the going down the road. So this is sitting on here pretty snug, and it'll keep it from cutting into our hose and having a big leak, okay? So it's not the high pressure line, it's the return line, but still you don't want to lose all your fluid or make a big mess of anything. Now this gearbox was rebuilt by Steer&Gear. They suggest that you clean out, flush out your pump, which is sitting over here. Now I've had that apart and cleaned it, rebuilt the seal situation on it, so we're good there. We don't have any debris in it. But if you're using your old pump, let's say you're going through and replacing just the box, putting it back in, you want all this stuff to be flushed out. Otherwise you're going to void your warranty if you do have an issue, and you want to get all that crap out of there anyways. All right, so we're buttoning up a few things here. I've got a new belt that we're going to tighten this thing up here. It's a Duralast 15380. And one thing you do have to watch for, not be too surprised about, is if you get a belt for your situation here, if you don't have a reference to go off of, and you get the belt for the specific model, and it's either too small or way too big, it could be just on an account that one or both of the pulleys are a different size than what it was originally intended for. Because sometimes you get a bigger pulley, smaller pulley, and then the diameter of the crank pulley might be a little different. So you have to take that into account and just give yourself a little bit of room. It's probably best to have it all put together first if you don't have an idea what pulley you need, or a belt, I should say, for those pulleys. But right here, we're going to look at a couple things. Over here, this is your pivot bolt. This is what this whole thing has an axis on. You have this elongated hole up here, and then the bolt that's for your water pump. Well, this is your actual adjustment. That's where you stretch this thing out, and you'll see where you'll tighten that up. Okay, so we want this thing level, so that's why you want the right size belt, and it'll bring it out some, and then we'll adjust it. And just a little tip, you have this square hole right here. You've got a 1/2 inch drive ratchet. You just simply use that to pull the tension on it. Make sure that you have this one tightened first, the pivot bolt, and then you go up here and tighten that guy down there and make sure it's snug, and then you'll have your tension back on your power steering pump. Okay, so we're about ready to button everything up here as far as all the swap and the project part of it done and out of the way. Problem is, it's the 5 degree night right now. It's been this way all day. Battery was flat. Of course, it hasn't been running for a week, so that really took it down. So we got it on the trickle charger. And what we want to do is when we get it running, maybe tomorrow, we want to make sure that our system is burped out. We're going to add the fluid to it since it's all been dry. We get it started and we want to run it lock to lock, all the way left, all the way right, add some fluid, keep checking it until it all feels smooth. You don't want those big grabs in it or anything like that. That means that you got air in your line. So we just want to let it burp the system out. Also watch for any leaks. So what we want to do in the next episode is kind of give a review on this box because we want to be able to go down the road and see how it feels. We have some footage from when it was a manual steering van, and we'll show you footage of power steering and what we think of it, how good it feels on the road. So one thing I do want to add, if you're going the other way on this, like you got a car, usually you're not going to do this on a van or anything, but if you're going to manual steering, let's be considerate of what we don't want to do, okay? We had to shorten this shaft, okay? We used the existing shaft isn't and just simply brought the dimensions up so that it would fit the bigger box, okay? If you're going the other way, you're going to need length. Please don't do anything like break the crash bolts on the inside of the column for the steering and stretch it out, okay? Don't do anything like that. Don't weld on a shaft extension. And what you want to do is either get the adapter. Firm Fill sells a little adapter. It's kind of bell-shaped. That'll adapt it from the steering coupler that you have to the spline part on the top of the box. You want to do that, or you want to get the proper steering column or steering shaft, okay? My Duster over here, when I got it, there were some things that was a little suspect on it. Somebody welded an extended shaft on there. Now the weld looked good. You could probably trust it maybe, but here's my concern. If you're going down the road, you hit a pothole, something hard enough surprising you, or you get in just enough of a wreck where you still have to maintain control or you're moving, that could snap, it could crack and break, and then you have no steering, and that's all because of that weld. So let's be safe out there, everybody, and don't do anything like that. Try to do it the right way or do the right solution for what you have going on, okay? So just a little safety precaution. Don't play with this kind of stuff. You want to make sure everything's bolted down good, everything's snug, go over it again, double check, and then obviously check around in your driveway, things like that. Just make sure it's safe before you go down the road with anything like this, okay? Especially going that other direction. So until next time, and we need you that next time because you can see how this turns out. We'll see you from the Hoosier Garage. Thanks.
Thank you for watching the Hoosier Garage. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more restoration, tips, and fun.